Imagine sitting inside one of the most advanced listening stations ever built, surrounded by screens filled with data from the farthest corners of space. Everything is routine, quiet, predictable. Then suddenly, every monitor begins displaying the same strange pattern, a signal, not random noise, not the familiar whisper of cosmic radiation, a signal so precise and deliberate that every scientist in the room falls silent. That is exactly what happened deep in the California desert when NASA's most powerful antennas detected something coming from beyond our solar system. What they discovered that day would challenge everything humanity thought it understood about the universe. And by the end of this story, you may start to wonder if we were ever truly alone at all. At this very moment, something extraordinary is unfolding in our solar system. This is not an old discovery resurfacing after years of debate, and it is not a theoretical idea discussed in university classrooms. This is happening right now, far above Earth, in the vast darkness between the planets, and the people studying it are some of the most brilliant scientific minds on the planet. Yet even they are struggling to explain what they are seeing. At the center of this mystery is an object known as 3I Atlas. It is the third confirmed interstellar visitor ever detected entering our solar system. But, unlike the objects that came before it, this one did not simply pass through silently. Instead, it did something completely unexpected. It transmitted a signal, and what scientists discovered inside that signal quickly sent shockwaves through major space agencies around the world. To understand how this all began, we need to go back to the early hours of October 17, 2025. NASA's Deep Space Network was performing routine monitoring operations across the California desert. These enormous antennas are designed to communicate with spacecraft traveling billions of miles away from Earth. They track probes exploring distant planets and maintain contact with Voyager, humanity's farthest spacecraft, which is currently drifting beyond the outer edge of the solar system. These instruments represent the most advanced listening technology humanity has ever created. On that quiet October morning, those antennas picked up something completely unexpected. It was not static. It was not the random background noise that astronomers constantly filter out. Instead, the signal appeared structured and deliberate. A repeating electromagnetic pulse was detected, originating from the interstellar object now known as 3I Atlas. What made the signal truly unsettling was its precision. Every 47 minutes, the pulse repeated itself with perfect timing. Each burst lasted exactly 11.3 seconds. Not 11 seconds. Not 12. Exactly 11.3. The pattern remained so consistent that engineers initially believed there must be a malfunction in the instruments. They checked their equipment again and again, running multiple verification tests before finally accepting that the signal was real. Nature rarely produces patterns with that level of precision. Cosmic events are typically chaotic. They are shaped by gravity, radiation, collisions, and countless unpredictable forces. But this signal behaved differently. It repeated with the accuracy of a perfectly designed clock. Then something even more unusual happened. Over the next 5 hours of observation, the signal began to grow stronger. By the end of that period, its strength had increased by more than 300%. The change suggested that whatever was producing the signal was becoming more active. Scientists monitoring the data began asking a troubling question. Was something inside the object powering up? Before we go any further, there is one critical detail about the signal that completely changed the way researchers interpreted what they were seeing. The transmission was occurring at a frequency of 1.42 gigahertz. At first glance, that number might not seem important, but in the world of astronomy, it carries enormous significance. That frequency corresponds exactly to the natural emission of hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. Scientists often refer to this region of the electromagnetic spectrum as the water hole. It is a quiet and stable frequency band that researchers have long believed would be the most logical place for an intelligent civilization to broadcast a message across space. The reasoning behind this idea is surprisingly simple. Hydrogen exists everywhere in the cosmos. Every star, every galaxy, and every cloud of interstellar gas contains hydrogen. Any advanced civilization studying the universe would eventually discover this frequency. It is essentially a universal reference point. Because of this, many astronomers believe that if an intelligent species ever attempted to communicate across the stars, they would likely choose this frequency. It is one signal that almost any technologically advanced civilization would recognize. That is why the discovery made scientists uneasy. 3I Atlas was not just emitting random radio waves. It appeared to be transmitting at the one frequency the entire universe shares. And the deeper analysts looked into the signal, the stranger it became. The moment researchers realized the signal from 3I Atlas was repeating with perfect timing, the atmosphere inside NASA's monitoring rooms changed completely. What had started as routine observation quickly became something far more serious. Engineers, analysts, and astrophysicists leaned closer to their screens, watching the incoming data streams with growing disbelief. Because when they examined the signal in greater detail, they discovered that the repeating pulse was not a single simple transmission. It was layered with patterns inside patterns, almost like information hidden within information. Each 11.3-second burst contained smaller repeating structures. Inside the main cycle, analysts noticed a secondary rhythm appearing every 1.7 seconds. And buried even deeper were microfluctuations that flickered in fractions of a second, far faster than any natural cosmic phenomenon normally produces. The signal looked less like a random emission and more like an intricate system of coded instructions. To put it simply, it resembled a message. Once that possibility entered the conversation, NASA began pulling in experts from outside traditional astronomy. Cryptographers were invited to study the signal structure. Radio engineers examined the transmission stability. Artificial intelligence researchers were asked to run pattern recognition programs across the data. Some of the specialists involved normally worked on highly classified communication technologies. These were people who spent their careers breaking encryption systems and analyzing complex signals that were never meant to be decoded. For days, teams worked almost non-stop, comparing the strange transmission with every known natural source of radio emissions in the universe. They checked pulsars, the rotating neutron stars that emit precise radio beams. They studied magnetars, which produce intense bursts of electromagnetic energy. They analyzed quasar emissions and solar interference. They even considered unusual plasma effects that sometimes occur in deep space. But every comparison led to the same conclusion. The signal did not match anything natural. When the final probability analysis was completed, the number stunned everyone involved. According to the models, the likelihood that the signal was created by natural astrophysical processes was less than 0.3%. That meant the probability of an artificial origin exceeded 99.7%. Think about that number for a moment. Scientists are trained to be cautious, often avoiding bold conclusions until overwhelming evidence exists. But a 99.7% probability is the kind of statistical certainty researchers rarely ignore. And yet the situation became even more confusing when they looked at the object itself. 3I Atlas had arrived from outside our solar system. Its trajectory clearly showed that it had traveled through interstellar space before entering our planetary neighborhood. No spacecraft from Earth could have reached that distance and returned unnoticed. No known probe from any human mission could explain its origin. So if the signal was artificial, the obvious question followed immediately: who created it? That question was still being debated when something happened that turned an already strange situation into something far more unsettling. 3 days after the signal was first detected, the transmission changed dramatically. On the night of October 20th, just after 11:15 Eastern Time, the repeating broadcast suddenly shifted behavior. Until that moment, the signal had been spreading outward like a typical radio emission, radiating broadly into space. But then, without warning, the pattern collapsed. For 8 minutes and 24 seconds, the signal narrowed into a focused beam. To understand why this alarmed scientists, it helps to think about how natural radio waves behave. When energy is released in space, it spreads outward in every direction, similar to ripples expanding across the surface of water. Natural emissions disperse. They do not concentrate themselves into tight directional beams. But this signal did exactly that. It focused. Observatories around the world quickly confirmed the change. Instruments at the Arecibo Legacy Observatory in Puerto Rico, which had recently been reactivated to monitor the object, recorded the same phenomenon. The beam was not drifting randomly across the sky. It was stable and controlled. Even more unsettling, the beam appeared to be pointing in a very specific direction: Earth. Scientists began calculating the exact orientation of the object in space. They mapped the vector of the signal and compared it with Earth's position in the solar system. The numbers lined up with extraordinary precision. Again and again, the calculations produced the same result. The transmission was aimed directly at our planet. Engineers at several facilities repeated the analysis, hoping that some small error might explain the result, but each attempt confirmed the same conclusion: the alignment was too accurate to be coincidence. Something had intentionally directed that beam, and the timing of the event made the situation even stranger. The focused transmission occurred exactly 9 days before 3I Atlas was expected to pass behind the Sunday. Once that happened, the intense solar glare would hide the object from Earth-based telescopes for nearly 3 weeks. During that time, scientists would lose the ability to observe it clearly. To some researchers, the timing felt almost deliberate, as if the object had sent a final focused transmission before temporarily disappearing from view. Was it a greeting, a warning, or something else entirely? No one could answer that question yet, but inside NASA and other major space agencies, the mood had shifted dramatically. The discovery was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It had become something far more serious. Inside the control rooms of major observatories, the atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as an unusual scientific observation was now being treated with an intensity rarely seen in modern space research. Conversations became quieter. Monitors that once displayed routine telemetry now showed restricted access warnings. The discovery surrounding 3I Atlas was no longer moving through normal public scientific channels. Instead, it had entered a phase of controlled internal analysis. Normally, a discovery of this scale would ignite immediate excitement across the global scientific community. Researchers would publish preliminary papers within hours. Social media accounts belonging to scientists would light up with speculation. Journalists would begin requesting interviews with observatories and space agencies. That pattern has repeated many times in the past. It happened when gravitational waves were first detected. It happened when the first direct image of a black hole was revealed. It happened when water ice was confirmed on the surface of the moon. But this time, none of that happened. Days passed with almost complete silence from the institutions that normally shared discoveries with the world. NASA released no press statements. The European Space Agency said nothing. China's Space Administration remained quiet. Even the International Astronomical Union, which typically reports new astronomical findings very quickly, offered no updates. To many scientists outside those organizations, the silence felt unusual. Whispers began spreading about something called the Discovery Protocol, a little-known internal framework that had reportedly been developed years earlier. According to people familiar with it, the protocol outlines the steps space agencies should follow if evidence of a potentially artificial extraterrestrial signal is ever detected. The process is structured and cautious. First, the data must be verified internally to eliminate the possibility of instrument errors. Next, government authorities and national security organizations are notified before any public announcement. Finally, agencies observe a temporary communication blackout, often lasting around 72 hours, allowing scientists to confirm the discovery before the public reacts. Officially, this waiting period is meant to prevent misinformation and premature conclusions. Scientists understand that extraordinary claims require extremely careful verification. A signal from another civilization would be the most important discovery in human history, and announcing it too quickly without absolute certainty could cause confusion. But in the case of 3I Atlas, something unusual happened. The 72-hour window passed, then a fourth day went by, then a fifth. Still, no official statement appeared. The continued silence made some researchers uneasy. If the signal had turned out to be natural after all, there would be no reason to remain quiet for that long. Normally, agencies would quickly reassure the public that the anomaly had been explained. But that reassurance never came. Eventually, one respected voice in astrophysics decided to speak publicly. The scientist was Avi Loeb, director of the Galileo project at Harvard University and a well-known figure in the study of unidentified interstellar objects. Loeb had long argued that humanity should seriously investigate the possibility that advanced technological artifacts could travel through space. When he examined the growing reports surrounding 3I Atlas, he became concerned by the lack of transparency. In a statement that spread rapidly through academic circles, he wrote that the global reaction looked less like scientific caution and more like institutional paralysis. He argued that science normally moves forward through open discussion and data sharing, not through silence. His message resonated with many researchers who were watching events unfold from outside government agencies. If the data truly suggested an artificial origin, then the world deserved to know. At the same time, others defended the cautious approach, arguing that extraordinary claims must be verified beyond any doubt before public disclosure. While the debate continued, the scientific analysis of 3I Atlas was becoming even more puzzling. New measurements were revealing details about the object's physical properties that did not resemble any known asteroid or comet. One of the most surprising discoveries involved its internal density. By analyzing the way the object interacted with gravity during its movement through the solar system, researchers were able to estimate how massive it should be. The numbers did not make sense. For an object of its apparent size, the gravitational influence it produced was extremely weak. That suggested the structure was far lighter than expected. When scientists modeled the possible internal composition, the only explanation that matched the observations was that the object was mostly hollow. Natural celestial bodies rarely form that way. Asteroids are usually solid rock or metal, and comets contain dense mixtures of ice and dust. A large object with extremely low internal density does not easily fit into those categories. Then there was the matter of its speed. As 3I Atlas entered the inner solar system, something unusual occurred. Instead of accelerating toward the sun under gravitational pull, the object appeared to slow down slightly. The change was small, only a fraction of a kilometer per second, but it was measurable. Under normal circumstances, gravity should cause incoming objects to gain speed as they approach the Sunday. The only way to reduce that acceleration would be if another force were pushing against it. In other words, some form of propulsion. When scientists combine that observation with the strange signal, the focused beam directed toward Earth, and the hollow internal structure, the list of possible explanations became very short. One physicist reviewing the data summarized the situation with a statement that quietly circulated among researchers. If geometry, symmetry, motion control, and communication all appear together in deep space, you may not be observing a natural object. You may be observing technology, and if that possibility was correct, then humanity might not just be studying an interstellar visitor. It might be encountering the first known machine ever discovered from beyond our solar system. As the final days of October approached, the atmosphere inside observatories and research centers around the world grew increasingly tense. Scientists were no longer simply collecting data about 3I Atlas. They were watching the clock. The object was moving steadily toward a position where the sun itself would block every telescope on Earth from seeing it. Once that happened, the visitor would disappear behind the solar glare for nearly 3 weeks. During that time, no ground-based instrument would be able to track its motion or analyze its signal. That meant the last observations before October 29th might be the final opportunity to gather information for a while. Every major observatory capable of monitoring deep space was now focused on the same target. Antennas listened continuously, optical telescopes captured images at every possible wavelength, and data servers filled with measurements that researchers hoped would reveal one more clue about what exactly had entered our solar system. But instead of settling into a predictable pattern, the signal from 3I Atlas continued to evolve. The bursts of radio energy were becoming increasingly compressed, each transmission shorter but far more complex than the one before it. What had originally appeared as a simple repeating pulse was now packed with intricate variations in amplitude and frequency. Teams studying the data began mapping the internal structure of the signal in 3 dimensions, searching for patterns that might reveal its purpose. What they found was astonishing. Hidden within the radio waves were layered harmonic structures that followed strict mathematical ratios. These were not random fluctuations. They aligned with numerical relationships seen in advanced signal encoding systems used in human communication technologies. Several analysts compared the pattern to a form of data compression, as if the transmission was attempting to fit more information into increasingly smaller windows of time. Some researchers began to suspect that the signal was building toward a final message. Others believed the opposite, that the system generating the transmission was preparing to shut down once the object disappeared behind the Sunday. At the same time, telescopes tracking the object's surface noticed something else unusual. The brief flashes of reflected light that had previously appeared as rotating triangular patterns were becoming clearer as imaging algorithms improved. When multiple images were stacked together, the shapes revealed a more complex structure. 3 spiraling patterns appeared to overlap across the surface of the object, rotating slowly in perfect synchronization. From certain angles, the formation resembled a magnetic field diagram, the kind physicists use to visualize the invisible forces surrounding charged particles. From other perspectives, the geometry looked strangely similar to the structure of a DNA helix, except inverted, as if the familiar blueprint of life had been mirrored and reshaped into a new form. No one could say with certainty whether the patterns were meaningful or simply coincidental reflections of light across an unusual surface. But the symmetry was difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, the signal continued to intensify. Just hours before 3I Atlas reached the edge of the sun's blinding glare, the transmission entered its most complex phase yet. The radio bursts were now layered with harmonics that some analysts described as musical. Not music in the traditional sense, but sequences of tones that followed mathematical relationships similar to those found in sound waves. To a trained ear, the data almost resembled a composition written in electromagnetic energy. And then, just as suddenly as the signal had appeared weeks earlier, it stopped. At exactly the moment when the object passed behind the Sun on October 29th, every monitoring station recorded the same event. The repeating pulses ended. The harmonic layers vanished. The quiet hum of background cosmic radiation returned to the antennas. 3I Atlas had gone silent. At that moment, scientists, government agencies, and research institutions around the world faced a decision unlike anything in the history of modern science. For weeks, they had watched an object behave in ways that challenged every familiar category in astronomy. They had recorded signals that appeared structured and deliberate. They had observed movements that suggested active control rather than passive motion through space. Now the object was temporarily hidden from view, and no one knew what it would do when it reappeared on the other side of the Sunday. The deeper question, however, was no longer about the object itself. The evidence had already raised a far more unsettling possibility. If 3I Atlas truly was engineered, if the signals were intentional and the patterns meaningful, then whoever or whatever created it had likely been observing humanity long before we noticed its presence. It had seen our reactions, it had seen our silence, it had seen the hesitation of governments and institutions unsure of how to respond. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the reach of our telescopes, it was waiting to see what humanity would do next. Because the universe might not have simply sent us a visitor. It may have sent us a question, one that every civilization eventually has to answer when it realizes it may not be alone. What happens when contact is no longer a theory, but a choice? Soon 3I Atlas will emerge from behind the Sun, and when it does, the next signal or the next silence could change the course of human history forever. If you want to explore what might happen next when this mysterious traveler returns into view, make sure you stay with the channel, because the universe still holds countless secrets waiting to be uncovered. Click on the next video and continue the journey with us as we dive even deeper into the most astonishing mysteries hidden in the darkness of space. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that humanity is no longer just watching the universe. The universe is watching us back. That is the question, hanging in the silence after 3I Atlas vanished behind the Sunday. Because when the signal stopped on October 29th, it did not simply end a transmission, it began a waiting period that may be one of the most important pauses in the history of human discovery. For the next 3 weeks, every telescope on Earth was effectively blind to the object. The sun's overwhelming glare created a wall of light that no optical system could penetrate. It did not matter how powerful the telescope was or how advanced the sensors were. The visitor had entered a region where observation was impossible. Humanity had been forced into the role of spectators, waiting for the object to emerge again on the other side of the solar glare.